The New Mexico Territory, 1879. The sun did not set in the high desert so much as it surrendered, bleeding out across the horizon in streaks of violent violet and bruised orange. It was a harsh land, indifferent to the suffering of anything that walked upon it, be it beast or man. The wind that swept down from the Organ Mountains carried the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. But on this particular evening, it also carried the scent of something out of place, rosewater and stale fear. Clara dragged one foot in front of the other. Her boots, fine leather things meant for city cobblestones, not the unforgiving grit of the Rio Grande Valley, worn nearly through to the skin. The hem of her dress was shredded, the once rich indigo fabric coated in a layer of pale dust that turned her into a ghost moving through the twilight. She had been walking for 2 days, maybe 3. She had lost count after the water in her canteen ran dry, and the heat began to warp the air into shimmering pools of nothingness. Ahead, the silhouette of a ranch rose against the dying light. It was a squat, sturdy structure made of timber and adobe, hunkered down against the earth as if bracing for a blow. A corral fence zigzagged like a scar across the scrubland. Clara stopped, her chest heaving. The air tasted of copper. She knew she should turn back, that civilized women did not wander onto cattle ranches alone at dusk. But her throat was so dry it felt like it was packed with sand. She took a step, stumbled, and caught herself. Survival was a cruel master, and it drove her forward toward the flickering yellow light of a lantern hanging from the porch beam. Eli Thompson sat on that porch, a whittling knife in one hand and a piece of cedar in the other. He did not carve anything in particular. He just peeled the wood away, shaving it down until there was nothing left, a habit he had picked up during the long waits between battles in the war. He heard the footsteps before he saw her. They were uneven, dragging, too light to be a man's. He stopped his knife. He did not reach for the Colt Navy revolver on his hip, but his hand hovered near it. A reflex carved into him deeper than any scar. "That's close enough," Eli said. His voice was like gravel crunching under a wagon wheel, low and devoid of warmth. The figure emerged from the shadows. She looked like a wreck. Her hair, a dark tangle, had come loose from its pins. Her face was gaunt, sun-scorched, but her eyes, wide and terrified, burned with a desperate intelligence. She held her hands up, palms open. They were shaking. "Water," she rasped. It was barely a word. "Please." Eli narrowed his eyes. He looked past her, scanning the darkness for a horse, a wagon, a man. Nothing but the wind hissing through the mesquite. "You alone?" he asked. She nodded, swaying. "Alone." Eli stood up. He was a tall man, lean and hard, with a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and then left out in the rain too long. A thick scar ran from his hairline down to his jaw, a souvenir from a Confederate saber at Shiloh. He stepped off the porch, the spurs on his boots chinking softly. He dipped a tin ladle into the water barrel by the door and held it out. Clara lunged for it, her hands gripping his wrist with shocking strength. She drank too fast, water spilling down her chin, washing away streaks of dust to reveal pale skin underneath. "Slow down," Eli commanded, pulling the ladle back. "You'll make yourself sick," she gasped, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thank you. I can work. I can pay." Eli looked at her dress. It was ruined, but the cut was expensive, silk and lace, torn by thorns. "You running from the law, ma'am?" "No," she said, too quickly. Her eyes darted to the side. "No law. Husband?" She flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of the jaw. But Eli saw it. He saw everything. "Dead," she said. "Recently? Does it matter?" Her voice gained a sudden, sharp edge. "I need a place to sleep, just for tonight. I have nowhere else." Before Eli could answer, the door to the bunkhouse swung open. 3 men spilled out, drawn by the voices. Silas, the foreman, a man with a belly full of beans and a heart full of vinegar, led the way. Behind him were Red and a young boy they called Skeeter. "What in tarnation is this?" Silas spat, hooking his thumbs in his belt. He looked Clara up and down with a sneer that made Eli's jaw tighten. "We are running a charity house now. Boss, or a brothel?" Clara took a step back, shrinking into herself. "Watch your mouth, Silas," Eli said quietly. The menace in his tone was enough to make the foreman shift his weight uneasily. "Just saying, boss. Look at her. That ain't no ranch woman. That's city silk. She's a runaway or a thief. Probably got a posse a mile behind her." "I am not a thief," Clara said, her voice trembling but loud enough to be heard. "I am willing to work." Silas laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Work? With their hands? I bet you never held anything heavier than a fan in your life. You're a liar, lady. I can smell it on you." Eli looked at Clara. Silas was cruel, but he wasn't wrong. Her hands were soft, uncalloused. She was hiding something. In this country, secrets got people killed. But then he looked at her feet, at the blood seeping through the cracked leather of her boots. He remembered the long march back from Georgia, the feeling of having nowhere to go and no one waiting. "She stays in the barn," Eli said. The silence that followed was heavy. Silas stared at him. "The barn? With the livestock? Unless you want to give up your bunk." "Silas." The foreman scowled and spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "She steals anything? It's coming out of your share, boss." "Barn's dry," Eli said to Clara, ignoring his men. "There's clean hay in the loft. Horse blankets. You leave at first light." Clara looked at him, and for a second, the fear in her eyes was replaced by something else, gratitude, or perhaps just relief that she wouldn't die in the dark tonight. "Thank you." She limped toward the barn, the eyes of the men burning holes in her back. The barn was a cathedral of shadows and the smell of alfalfa. Horses shifted in their stalls, their hooves thumping softly against the packed earth. Clara climbed the ladder to the loft, her legs screaming in protest, and collapsed into a pile of hay. She curled into a ball, her knees pulled to her chest, trying to stop the shaking. She had made it. She was alive. But the echo of Silas's words, liar, thief, stung worse than her blistered feet. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Every creak of the barn wood sounded like footsteps. Every hoot of an owl sounded like a signal. Below her, the barn door creaked open. Clara froze, her hand going to the small pocket sewn into her petticoat where she kept the only thing of value she had left. It was Eli. She watched through the gaps in the floorboards as he walked down the center aisle, checking the horses. He moved with a quiet economy, touching a flank here, checking a latch there. He stopped at the last stall, where a young foal lay in the straw, breathing shallowly. The foal had been colicky all day. Clara had heard the men grumbling about it, saying it wouldn't last the night and wasn't worth the bullet to put it down. Eli leaned over the gate, murmuring something low and soothing. He looked tired. The lantern light cast deep hollows in his cheeks. After a moment, he turned and walked back out, leaving the lantern hanging on a nail by the door. Clara waited until his footsteps faded. Then, driven by an instinct she couldn't name, she climbed down. The foal was a bay, slick with sweat, its eyes rolling white with pain. It thrashed weakly, legs tangling in the straw. Clara had never worked a ranch, but she knew pain. She opened the stall gate and knelt beside the animal. "Shh," she whispered. "Easy now." She didn't know what to do, not really, but she remembered a carriage horse back in New Orleans that had taken sick. The groom rubbed its belly, kept it warm, and kept it calm. Clara took off her torn shawl and began to rub the foal's flank, moving in slow, rhythmic circles. She hummed a lullaby, a song from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Hours passed. The foal stopped thrashing. Its breathing evened out. Clara's arm ached, but she didn't stop. She wiped the sweat from the animal's nose with her sleeve. She didn't hear the door open again. Eli stood in the entrance. He had come back to check on the foal, fully expecting to drag a carcass out to the coyotes. Instead, he saw the woman, the liar, the city girl, curled up in the straw next to the animal, her hand resting on its neck. The foal was sleeping peacefully. Clara was asleep too. Her head was pillowed on her arm. In the dim light, the hardness he had seen in her face was gone. She looked young and devastatingly sad. Tracks of tears had cut clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. Eli watched her for a long time. He felt a strange tightness in his chest, a feeling he had thought dead and buried along with his wife and son. This woman was in trouble. He knew it. She brought a storm with her, and his ranch was barely standing as it was. But she had saved the foal. He walked over quietly, his boots making no sound on the straw. He unbuttoned his heavy wool coat, a rough gray thing that smelled of wood smoke and gun oil, and draped it over her. She stirred but did not wake, her hand curling instinctively into the warmth of the fabric. Eli turned and walked out into the night, the cold air biting through his shirt, leaving her there with the life she had saved. Morning broke with the brutality of a hammer strike. The sun crested the mountains and instantly baked the earth. The ranch came alive with the sounds of men shouting, cattle lowing, and the clatter of pans from the cookhouse. Clara woke up with a start. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the smell of hay and horse brought it all back. She sat up, the heavy coat sliding off her shoulders. She stared at it. It was huge, the sleeves long enough to swallow her hands. She brought the collar to her face. It smelled of him, the man with the scar. She stood up, brushing the straw from her dress. The foal was up, nudging her pocket looking for grain. She smiled, a small, fragile thing, and patted its neck before slipping out of the stall. When she emerged from the barn, the activity in the yard stopped. Silas, red, and the others stared at her. She was still wearing the ruined blue dress, but she had washed her face in the horse trough and pinned her hair back as best she could. She carried Eli's coat folded over her arm. Eli was by the corral, saddling a horse. Not just any horse. It was a massive roan stallion, a beast with a chest like a barrel and a temper that was legendary in the county. His name was Whiskey, and no one rode him but Eli. Clara walked up to him. The men watched, waiting for the explosion. "Your coat," she said, holding it out. Eli didn't look at her. He tightened the cinch, the leather creaking. "Keep it. It's cold in the mornings." "I can't take your coat." "Take it," he said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "You saved the foal." Clara lowered her gaze. "It just needed comforting." "Comforting doesn't usually cure colic," Eli said, "but it's alive." He looked at her boots. They were falling apart. He looked at the horizon, where the heat shimmer was already dancing. "The water pump's dry," Eli said, loud enough for the men to hear. "Needs a part from town. We're hauling from the creek, 2 miles east." He handed her the reins of the roan stallion. The silence in the yard was absolute. Silas dropped the rope he was holding. Red's mouth hung open. "Boss," Silas growled, stepping forward, "you ain't letting her ride Whiskey. That horse throws me if I look at him wrong. She ain't you. Silas," Eli said calmly. He looked at Clara. "You know how to ride?" Clara looked at the massive animal. She was terrified of many things. The man she had run from, the empty desert, the starvation that gnawed at her belly. But she was not afraid of horses. She had grown up on a thoroughbred farm in Kentucky before the war took everything. Before the gambling, before the ruin. "Yes," she said. "Get on, then take the canteens, fill them up, come back." It was a test. She knew it. If she ran, he would hunt her down. If she fell, he would leave her. Clara took the reins. She stroked the stallion's nose, whispering a soft word that the men couldn't hear. The horse flicked an ear, listening. She put her foot in the stirrup, which was far too long for her, and swung up. It wasn't graceful, hindered by her skirts, but she settled into the saddle with a natural balance that couldn't be faked. The stallion shifted, dancing sideways. The men tensed, waiting for the buck. Clara simply gathered the reins, sat deep, and nudged him forward. The horse obeyed instantly. She rode out of the yard, her back straight, the heavy gray coat draped over the saddle horn. "Well, I'll be damned," the boy, Skeeter, whispered. Silas spat on the ground. She's a witch, or a horse thief. Ain't no city woman rides like that. Eli watched her go until she was just a speck in the dust. He didn't say a word. He just picked up his saddlebags and threw them over the fence rail. Clara returned 2 hours later. The canteens were full. She slid off the horse, her legs trembling from the effort. But she didn't complain. She watered the horse first, then brought the canteens to the cookhouse. She didn't leave. "I can cook," she told Cookie, the old man who ran the kitchen with a sour disposition and a wooden spoon he used as a weapon. "And I can mend. I see the boys have holes in their shirts big enough to put a fist through." Cookie grunted. "I don't need no help." "You burned the biscuits this morning," Clara said softly. "I smelled them." Cookie narrowed his eyes, then handed her an apron. It was stiff with grease. "You burn my beans, and you walk." By noon, the bunkhouse smelled of fresh bread and stew that actually had flavor. The men ate in sullen silence, but they ate everything. Clara sat in the corner, mending a torn saddle blanket with a needle and thread she had found in a tin box. Eli came in to get coffee. He watched her working. Her fingers were quick, precise. "You so good," he observed. Clara jumped slightly, the needle slipping and nicking her thumb. A drop of bright red blood welled up. She stuck her thumb in her mouth, her eyes widening. I used to sew for a doctor," she said, her voice muffled. "Back east, stitched up cuts, mended sheets." "A doctor," Eli repeated. He looked at the stitch she had just made. It was a saddle stitch, a heavy-duty lock stitch used by leather workers, not doctors. "Yes," she said, looking away. Is there more work? I want to earn my keep." "There's always work," Eli said. "But we don't need a seamstress. We need hands that can pull wire and brand calves." "I learn fast," Clara said. "We'll see." That evening, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves of the main house. Eli sat in his chair by the cold fireplace. He hadn't lit a fire in the hearth in 5 years. He cleaned his Winchester rifle, the oil rag moving rhythmically over the blue steel barrel. He thought about the woman sleeping in his barn. He thought about the way she rode a horse that killed a man 2 years ago. He thought about the lie regarding the doctor. She was running, and whatever she was running from was bad enough to make a woman walk into the desert to die. The ranch hands were right. She was in trouble. A logical man would have given her $5 and put her on the stagecoach to Santa Fe in the morning. But Eli Thompson hadn't been a logical man since the day he came home from the war to find 3 graves on his hill instead of a family. He was just a man waiting for the end. He stood up and walked to the window. The barn was dark. He went back to his chair, but he didn't put the rifle back in the rack on the wall. Instead, he carried it to his bedroom. He laid it on the quilt next to him, the cold metal pressing against his side through his shirt. He stared up at the ceiling, listening to the wind. He sensed the shift in the air, the way the atmosphere changes before a thunderstorm rolls in. The woman was the storm, and for the first time in a long time, Eli wasn't just waiting for the rain. He was afraid that it might wash away. The weeks that followed Clara's arrival were not measured in days or hours, but in the slow, grinding friction of resentment. The ranch was a small world, isolated by miles of scrub brush and black basalt rock. And in such a confined space, a new element did not just settle in, it disrupted the entire ecosystem. Clara had been moved from the barn loft to a small, drafty lean-to attached to the side of the bunkhouse. It had once been used to store cured hams and sacks of flour, but now it held a cot, a wash basin, and the heavy silence of a woman surrounded by men who did not want her there. The walls were thin. She could hear them at night, the rough laughter, the slap of playing cards, and the low, murmuring speculation about who she really was. The trouble started on a Tuesday, a day when the heat lay on the valley floor like a heavy wool blanket. Silas, the foreman, came storming out of the bunkhouse, his face flushed a dark, angry crimson. He marched straight to the lean-to door and kicked it open. Clara was inside. mending a tear in one of the canvas feed sacks. She jumped, the needle pricking her finger. "Where is it?" Silas roared. He filled the doorway, a wall of muscle and hostility. "Where is what?" Clara asked, standing up slowly. She kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "My money." I had $20 in silver eagles wrapped in a bandana under my mattress. "Gone." He took a step inside, the air suddenly smelling of stale tobacco and aggression. "Ain't nobody here a thief. We have been riding together for 3 years. Then you show up, sneaking around like a coyote, and suddenly my steak is missing." "I did not take your money," Clara said. She held her chin up, a reflex of pride she had not yet lost. "Liar!" Silas spat. "You're nothing but a grifter. I saw you eyeing my saddlebags yesterday." He reached out, grabbing her arm. His grip was bruising. Clara gasped and tried to pull away, but he yanked her toward the door. "We're gonna shake this room down," Silas yelled to the men gathering in the yard. "See what else the little lady has filched? Let her go, Silas." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the heat like a knife. Eli stood by the water trough, 50 feet away. He had been washing the dust from his neck, his shirt unbuttoned, water dripping from his hair. He didn't look like he was posturing for a fight. He just looked tired. But his hand was resting on the fence post, inches from where his gun belt hung. Silas froze but didn't release her. "She stole my silver. Boss, $20. Eli walked over, his boots crunching heavily in the gravel. He stopped 3 feet from them. "You see her take it?" "Didn't have to. Who else would it be?" "Let her go," Eli repeated. This time, the command was unmistakable. Silas released her with a shove. Clara stumbled back against the rough wood of the wall, rubbing her arm. Eli looked at Clara. His eyes were hard, searching. He looked for the telltale guilt, the flush of shame, the shifting gaze. He saw only fear and a cold, hard indignation. "Did you take it?" Eli asked. "No," Clara said. Eli turned to the foreman. "Turn out your pockets, Silas." What?" Silas bristled, his hand going to his knife. "Are you taking her word over mine?" "I said turn them out," Silas cursed, a long stream of profanity that invoked God and the devil in equal measure. But he did it. He pulled the lining of his pockets inside out. Lint, tobacco flakes, a clasp knife. Nothing else. "Check your saddlebags again," Eli said. "And check the pocket of your winter coat. You were wearing it last night when the temperature dropped." Silas stared at him, hate radiating off him in waves, then stomped off toward the tech room. A moment later, the silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Skeeter, the young boy, looked at his boots. Red spat on the ground. Silas emerged a minute later, looking sullen. He didn't say a word, just jerked his chin in a nod that was barely an admission. He had found it. "Get back to work," Eli said to the group. "The next man who accuses her without proof walks to El Paso." The men dispersed, grumbling, casting dark looks at the lean-to. Eli turned back to Clara. She was still rubbing her arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," Eli said, his voice rough. "You stay out of their way. They're looking for a reason to hang you, and I can't watch them 24 hours a day. I didn't do anything. Being here is doing something," Eli said. He turned and walked away, his back broad and unyielding. Despite the hostility, a strange, quiet rhythm began to form between the rancher and the runaway. It was not friendship. They were both too damaged for something as simple as that, but it was a kind of understanding. It was the shared language of people who found silence preferable to the noise of the world. In the mornings, before the sun fully crested the peaks, Clara would find a tin cup of black coffee waiting for her on the railing of the main house porch. Eli never handed it to her. He would just leave it there and go about his business. She would drink it watching him work the horses, the bitter heat of the liquid warming her against the dawn chill. One afternoon, they found themselves working side by side on the north pasture fence. A rock slide had taken out 20 yards of post and wire. The work was brutal. Eli used a heavy iron bar to dig new post holes in the rocky soil. his shirt soaked through with sweat. Clara, wearing a pair of oversized leather gloves she had found in the barn, held the wire taut while he stapled it down. They worked for hours without speaking. The only sounds were the strike of the hammer, the grunt of effort, and the wind whistling through the barbs. When they finished, Eli wiped his forehead with his sleeve and looked at the horizon. The sky was turning a sickly yellow-green. "A storm is coming," he said. Clara looked up. "Rain? Dust, maybe worse." He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time that day, she had a smudge of dirt across her cheek, and her hair was escaping its pins, whipping around her face in the rising wind. She looked exhausted, but she hadn't complained once. Not about the heat, not about the weight of the wire, not about the blood blister forming on her thumb. "You pulled your weight today," he said. It was a simple statement, devoid of praise, but to Clara, it felt like a medal. "I told you I could work," she said. Eli nodded slowly. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. He took a swig and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed just for a second, and the contact felt electric, jarring. Clara took the canteen, conscious of where his mouth had been, and drank. "Why do you stay?" Eli asked suddenly. "This land. It breaks people. It's trying to break you." Clara lowered the canteen. She looked out at the vast, empty expanse of the desert. "Because there is nowhere else to go. And because of the emptiness, it feels safe. No one is looking for anyone out here." "Someone is always looking," Eli said. The shadow crossed his face again. The old soldier's look. "Who are you looking for, Eli?" she asked. The boldness of the question surprising even her. He took the canteen back and capped it. "No one. Everyone I ever looked for is gone." The storm he predicted hit 2 nights later, and it hit with the violence of a physical assault. It wasn't dust this time. It was a freezing deluge, a sudden drop in temperature that turned the autumn rain into piercing shards of ice. Eli was in the tack shed, a small outbuilding halfway between the house and the barn, repairing a snapped bridle. The wind slammed the door shut with a crack like a gunshot. A moment later, the door burst open again. Clara tumbled in, drenched, shivering so hard her teeth chattered audibly. She had been caught crossing from the cookhouse to her lean-to. "Close it!" Eli shouted over the roar of the wind. Clara threw her weight against the wood, latching the heavy iron hook. The noise of the storm instantly muffled to a dull roar, leaving them in the sudden, intimate quiet of the shed. It was dark, lit only by a single kerosene lantern hanging from a hook. The air smelled of oiled leather, sweet hay, and the damp wool of Eli's coat hanging on a peg. Clara stood hugging herself, water pooling around her boots. Her dress was soaked, clinging to her frame, outlining the curve of her hips and the shivering arch of her spine. Her lips were blue. "You're freezing," Eli said. He stood up, abandoning the bridle. I didn't think it would hit so fast," she stammered. Eli grabbed the rough wool blanket he kept on a shelf for emergencies. But it felt too thin. He looked at her, at the way her body was convulsing with the cold. Hypothermia could kill a person in the high desert in an hour if they were wet. "Come here," he said. Clara hesitated, her eyes wide. "I said come here." "You'll catch your death." She stepped toward him. Eli took his heavy coat from the peg, the same one he had covered her with that first night, and wrapped it around her shoulders. But her shivering didn't stop. It was violent, racking her small frame, without thinking, or perhaps thinking too much and ignoring the warning bells in his head. Eli pulled her against him. He wrapped his arms around the bundle of the coat, trapping her body heat, pressing her against the solid warmth of his chest. Clara stiffened for a heartbeat, then melted. She buried her face in the hollow of his shoulder. He was warm. He was solid. He smelled of tobacco and rain and safety. They stood there for a long time, the storm raging outside, the lantern casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. Eli's chin rested on the top of her head. He could feel the dampness of her hair. He could feel the rapid beat of her heart against his ribs. The shivering slowly subsided, replaced by a different kind of tension. The air in the shed grew thick, charged with something unspoken. Eli became acutely aware of the softness of her, the way she fit against him. It had been years since he had held a woman. Years since he had allowed himself to be anything other than a machine built for survival. Clara pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Her eyes were dark, dilated in the dim light. The distance between their faces was mere inches. "Eli," she whispered. It was the first time she had said his name without a title or a question attached. He should push her away. He should open the door and send her back to the bunkhouse. But his hands betrayed him. One moved up to cup the back of her head, his thumb brushing the wet hair from her temple. "Tell me the truth," he said, his voice low and rough. "Who are you running from?" Clara's gaze faltered. She looked down at his chest. "I told you, my husband is dead." "You said that. But you didn't say how, and you didn't say why you look over your shoulder every time a horse rides in." "He was a bad man," Clara said. Her voice was brittle. He gambled. He drank. He died in a fight. That's all." Eli lifted her chin, forcing her to look at him. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but behind the tears, there was a wall, a shuttered, locked door. She was lying. Not about the bad man, perhaps, but about the death, about the finality of it. The eyes don't match the words. "Clara," he murmured. "Please," she whispered. A desperate plea. "Don't make me say it. If I say it, it makes it real. Just let me be here. Let me be safe." Eli looked at her, at the fierce, terrified will to survive that mirrored his own. He let his hand drop. He stepped back, breaking the contact. The loss of warmth was immediate and painful. "Storm's letting up," he said, turning his back to her to pick up the lantern. "You should go back before the men see you in here." Clara stood there for a moment, bereft, then pulled the coat tighter around herself. "Yes, I should." The next evening, the air was crisp and clean, washed, scrubbed by the storm. Eli sat in his cabin, the door open to the night. Clara had brought him his supper, a plate of beans and cornbread, and lingered. He didn't send her away. Instead, he walked to the mantel and picked up a small, framed tintype. The metal was bent at the corner, the image grainy and fading. "Sarah," Eli said, staring at the woman in the picture. She was smiling, a stiff, formal smile, holding a baby wrapped in white lace. "And Thomas, he was 2. Clara moved closer, looking at the image. She was beautiful. "She was kind," Eli said. "Too kind for a war. The fever took them to 63 while I was in Tennessee. I came home to a silent house." He placed the picture back on the mantel, face down. "I dug the graves myself, and when I filled them in, I put everything I had left in there with them." He turned to Clara. His face was a mask of scars and shadows. "I don't have anything left to give. Clara, I don't love it. I hope so. I just endure." Clara reached out. Her hand, rougher now than when she arrived, covered his clenched fist on the mantel. Her touch was light, but it burned. "You gave a stranger a coat," she said softly. "You stopped a man from hurting me. That isn't nothing. Eli, that isn't empty." Eli looked at her hand. He wanted to pull away. He wanted to tell her that kindness was just a habit, not a feeling. But he didn't move. He stood there, anchored by her touch, while the clock on the wall ticked away the seconds of a life he thought was over. The peace was shattered 2 days later when Skeeter rode back from town with the mail and a wagon full of supplies. He was bursting with news, his young face flushed with excitement and the self-importance of being the bearer of tidings. "You hear about the bounty hunter?" Skeeter asked at supper, shoving a biscuit into his mouth. The table went quiet. Silas looked up from his plate. "What bounty hunter?" "Big fella, mean-looking, wears a long duster and carries a scattergun. He was asking around the saloon in Massilia, looking for a woman." Clara dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the tin plate. She froze, her face draining of blood. "What kind of woman?" Silas asked, his eyes darting to Clara. "Dark hair, pretty. Said she's a grifter and a killer. Said she ran out on a debt in New Orleans and left a trail of bodies." Skeeter looked at Clara, then looked away. Suddenly realizing the weight of his words, said she has a scar on her left palm. The silence in the cookhouse was suffocating. Every eye turned to Clara. Instinctively, her left hand curled into a fist and tucked into the folds of her skirt. "Let me see your hand," Silas said, standing up. "Sit down." "Silas," Eli said. He hadn't looked up from his coffee. "She fits the bill. Boss, New Orleans, the running, the lying. Let me see her hand." "I said sit down." Eli's voice was calm, terrifyingly so. He stood up slowly and walked over to Clara. "Come with me." He led her out of the cookhouse, away from the prying eyes, into the darkness of the main yard. He walked until they were out of earshot, near the windmill. "Show me," he said. Clara was shaking, slowly, agonizingly. She opened her left hand. There, running diagonally across her palm, was a thin, jagged white line, a knife scar. Eli looked at it. He didn't flinch. "Did you kill anyone?" he asked. I defended myself," she whispered. "He was going to kill me, and he was going to kill—" She stopped. "Kill who?" "It doesn't matter. I didn't murder anyone in cold blood. Eli, I swear it on my mother's soul. The bounty hunter says otherwise. The bounty hunter is paid to say otherwise. The man who is dead." "He had powerful friends, crooked friends." She grabbed the front of Eli's shirt, her knuckles white. "If you turn me in, I will hang, or worse. Please, I'll leave. I'll walk into the desert tonight." Eli looked down at her. He saw the terror, but he also saw the steel. She was a survivor, just like him, and the law out here was often just a matter of who had the most money to pay for it. "You ain't walking nowhere," Eli said. "Go to your room. Stay out of sight. You believe me? I believe that if you were a killer, I'd be dead by now." That night, the temperature plummeted again. The high desert winter was encroaching. Eli lay in his bed in the main cabin, staring at the ceiling beams, the rifle by his side. He couldn't sleep. The image of the scar on her palm kept flashing in his mind. The door creaked. He sat up, swinging the rifle toward the sound in one fluid motion. "It's me," a voice whispered. Clara stood in the doorway. She was wearing her thin nightdress, a shawl wrapped around her, but she was shivering violently. The lean-to was freezing. It had no insulation, no fire. "I'm cold," she said. It was the simple truth, but it was also a lie. She wasn't just cold. She was terrified. The news of the bounty hunter had stripped away her defenses. She needed to be near the only thing in this world that had offered her protection. Eli lowered the rifle. "Clara, go back." "I can't," she whispered. She took a step into the room. The moonlight coming through the window turned her into a specter. "I can't be alone tonight. Please." She walked to the side of the bed. Eli looked at her, his resolve crumbling like dried mud. He moved over, lifting the heavy quilt. She climbed in. She didn't touch him at first. She just lay on the far edge of the mattress, curled into a tight ball, soaking up the warmth of the bedding. But the bed was narrow. Slowly, inevitably, she drifted toward the center. Her cold feet brushed his calf. He flinched, but didn't pull away. She turned, pressing her back against his chest, fitting herself into the curve of his body. "Eli," she breathed. He wrapped an arm around her waist. It was meant to be comforting, but the moment their bodies fully connected, the dynamic shifted. The friction of skin against skin ignited a fire that had been smoldering for weeks. Clara turned in his arms, burying her face in his neck. Her lips brushed his pulse. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and his hand tangled in her hair. He kissed her. It wasn't a sweet kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of fear and dust and a hunger so deep it hurt. Their lovemaking was slow, clumsy with urgency. It was the collision of two broken things trying to make a whole. Eli's hands, rough and scarred, mapped the landscape of her body with a reverence that made Clara weep silently. She clung to him, her nails digging into his shoulders, anchoring herself to the earth. There were no flowery words, no promises of forever. Just the heat of breath, the friction of skin, the desperate need to feel alive in a world that smelled of death. When it was over, they lay tangled together, the silence of the room heavy and absolute. Clara fell asleep with her head on his chest. Eli stayed awake, listening to the wind, knowing that he had just crossed a line from which there was no return. Morning brought the light, and with it, the reckoning. Clara woke before Eli. The fire in the hearth had died down to ash. She felt a strange, terrifying peace. She got up, finding her dress too torn and cold to put back on immediately. She saw Eli's work shirt hanging on the chair, a faded blue flannel, soft with age. She put it on. It hung to her knees. The sleeves rolled up 3 times to free her hands. She went to the kitchen to start the coffee, moving with a domestic familiarity that felt dangerous. She was stoking the stove when the front door opened. Silas and Red stood there. They had come for orders for the day. They stopped dead. They saw Clara standing in the ranch boss's kitchen, wearing nothing but his shirt, her hair loose and tumbled, her legs bare. The scent of the bedroom still clung to her. Clara froze, the poker in her hand. Silas looked from her to the bedroom door, where Eli was just emerging, buttoning his trousers, his hair mussed. The realization hit the foreman like a physical blow. The surprise on his face curdled instantly into a sneer of pure disgust. "Well," Silas said, his voice dripping with venom, "I guess we know how the lying whore pays her rent now." Eli stepped forward, his eyes turning to black ice. "Get out. We're going," Silas said, backing up, his eyes fixed on Clara with a look that made her skin crawl. "But don't think this stays here. Boss, you brought a viper into your bed. Don't be surprised when she bites." He slammed the door. Clara dropped the poker. It clamored on the floor, the sound ringing like a funeral bell. She looked at Eli. He didn't look at her. He looked at the closed door. His jaw set so hard the muscle jumped. The whispers began before the sun was even up. By noon, they would be shouts. And by nightfall, the ranch would be a powder keg waiting for a match. The ledger lay open on the rough-hewn oak table, its pages yellowed and smelling of dry paper and tobacco. Clara sat before it, the nib of her pen scratching rhythmically against the surface. The ink was black, stark against the page, turning the chaos of the Thompson Ranch into neat, orderly columns of debit and credit. Eli had made the decision 2 days after the incident in the bedroom. He had walked into the cookhouse, tossed a heavy iron key onto the table in front of her, and told her she was taking over the books and the household management. It was a promotion, but in the eyes of the men, it was a declaration of war. Outside the window, the wind whipped dust against the glass, a constant scratching sound that grated on the nerves. The door swung open, admitting a gust of grit and Silas, the foreman. He did not knock. He did not take off his hat. He marched to the desk, his spurs jingling with an aggressive cadence. He slammed a leather glove down on the ledger, smearing the wet ink of the last entry. "We need to talk." "Thompson," Silas barked, ignoring Clara entirely as he looked over her head at Eli, who was oiling a bridle by the hearth. Eli did not look up. "Talk." "I ain't taking orders from a woman," Silas said, his voice tight with a rage that had been fermenting for weeks. "Especially not one who warms your bed. I asked for supplies for the south fencing crew 2 days ago. She told me I had to wait until the inventory was done. Me, waiting for her permission." Clara set the pen down. Her hand trembled slightly, but she clasped it in her lap to hide it. "The inventory was necessary. Silas, we are missing 3 sacks of flour and a coil of wire. I needed to know where they went before we bought more." Silas turned on her, his lip curling. "You calling me a thief again, little lady? You got a lot of nerve for a stray cat." "Enough," Eli said. The single word was spoken softly, but it carried the weight of a hammer striking an anvil. He stood up, the bridle hanging from his hand like a weapon. "Clara manages the stores. She manages the money. You need something. You go through her. If the inventory is short, it's her job to find out why." "It's unnatural," Silas spat. "The men don't like it. They're saying she's bewitched you. They're saying she's bringing trouble down on us. I've got 3 hands ready to walk come payday if she's still here." Then they can walk, Eli said, meeting the foreman's gaze with cold indifference. And if you don't like the way things are run, you can saddle up with them. I pay you to run cattle, Silas, not to preach morality. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Silas stared at Eli, his face reddening, realizing that his ultimatum had struck a wall of granite. He looked at Clara, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, before snatching his glove off the desk. You're making a mistake, boss, Silas growled. A big one. When the wolves come for her, they're going to take you down too. He turned and stomped out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the tins on the shelf. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She looked down at the smeared ink. Maybe he is right. I am causing too much friction. Eli walked over to the table. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his thumb brushing the fabric of her dress. A new one. Simple calico that she had sewn herself from store-bought cloth. Friction burns off the dead wood, Eli said. Silas has been skimming off the top for 2 years. He's just mad you noticed. Keep writing. Clara. The tension in the bunkhouse was palpable, but out in the corral, things were different. The ranch had acquired a string of 3-year-old Mustangs from a breaker in Mexico. Wild-eyed creatures with tangled manes and a distrust of anything on 2 legs. Usually, the breaking process was a brutal affair involving ropes, heavy saddles, and the domination of spirit. But the day after the confrontation with Silas, Clara walked out to the round pen where a particularly skittish sorrel mare was pacing the fence line, lathered in sweat. Red and Skeeter were watching from the rail, smoking cigarettes. Don't get too close, ma'am, Skeeter warned, though his voice lacked the malice of the older men. She's a biter. Took a chunk out of Red's sleeve this morning. Clara ignored them. She didn't enter the pen, she just stood by the fence, humming a low, monotonous tune. She stood there for 20 minutes, letting the horse smell her, letting the animal see that she wasn't holding a rope or a whip. Slowly, she climbed the rail and slipped inside. Red straightened up. Hey, are you crazy? Boss'll skin us if you get stomped. Clara held up a hand, silencing him. She moved with a fluid grace, keeping her eyes averted from the horse's gaze, acting as if she belonged to the air and the dust rather than the predatory world of men. She had a pocket full of dried apple slices. She didn't approach the mare. She waited. She walked in a slow circle, making the horse move her feet, controlling the space without force. It was a dance, silent and ancient. When the mare finally lowered her head and licked her lips, a sign of submission, Clara stopped. The mare took a hesitant step toward her, then another. Clara reached out, palm flat. The mare sniffed her hand, blowing hot air against her skin, and took the apple slice. Eli had come out onto the porch to watch. He leaned against the support beam, his arms crossed. He had seen men break horses with brutality, and he had seen men break them with patience, but he had never seen anyone talk to a horse with their body the way Clara did. Later, as they walked back to the house for the midday meal, Eli looked at her sideways. You didn't learn that sewing for a doctor, he said. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. Her face was flushed from the sun, her eyes bright with a small victory. No, I lived near a livery stable once, before everything turned black. The owner was a kind man. He let me sit on the fence and watch. He taught me that horses don't understand force. They only understand safety. You have to be their safe place. You got a touch, Eli admitted. That sorrel would have taken Silas a week to saddle. You had her following you like a dog in an hour. Animals are easier than people, Clara said, her smile fading slightly. They don't lie. They tell you exactly how they feel. And how do they feel? Scared, she said softly. Mostly, they are just scared. The bond between them grew in the quiet spaces of the day. It wasn't spoken of. To speak of it would be to give it a name, and names were dangerous things, but it was there in the way Eli lingered over his coffee in the morning, watching her knead dough. It was there in the way Clara mended his shirts, her stitches small and precise, almost tender. They ate their meals together at the small table in the main room, the hierarchy of boss and servant dissolving into the intimacy of a man and a woman sharing bread. One evening, under a moon that hung fat and white over the mesas, they sat on the porch steps. The air was cool, smelling of sage and cooling earth. Eli was smoking a pipe, the cherry glowing red in the dark. "You're smiling," Clara noted, looking at him. Eli touched the corner of his mouth, surprised. "Am I?" "Yes, it looks strange on you, but good." Eli looked at her. The moonlight washed out the fatigue in her face, leaving only the delicate architecture of her bones and the dark, haunted depth of her eyes. He felt a sudden, sharp ache in his chest, a desire to protect her that went beyond duty. He leaned in. It wasn't planned. He simply closed the distance between them. Clara didn't pull away. She tilted her head up, her breath hitching. His lips brushed hers. It was a chaste kiss, dry and tentative, asking for permission rather than taking it. Clara made a small sound in her throat and pressed back against him. For a second, the world of cattle and dust and bounty hunters ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of his mouth and the smell of tobacco smoke. When they pulled apart, Eli didn't retreat into his usual stoicism. He kept his hand on her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I haven't forgotten how to be a man, Clara," he whispered. "I haven't forgotten how to be a woman," she replied, her voice trembling. I thought I had lost the right." "You don't lose rights," Eli said. "You just lose your way. We will find it back." But peace in the territory was a fragile thing, easily shattered. 3 days later, a rider appeared on the horizon. He was not a ranch hand. He rode a tall, leggy gelding and wore a duster coat covered in the dust of a long trail. He didn't ride with the hurried pace of a traveler. He rode with the slow, deliberate plod of a hunter. Clara was in the garden patch she'd started behind the house, watering the struggling tomato plants. She saw the rider before the dog started barking. She dropped the bucket. The water spilled into the dry earth, turning it to mud instantly. "Eli," she hissed, running toward the back door. Eli was inside, cleaning his rifle. He saw her face, pale, eyes wide with terror, and didn't ask questions. He stood up and pointed to the trap door beneath the rug in the pantry, a root cellar used for keeping potatoes cool. "Get in," he ordered. "Stay quiet." Clara scrambled down the ladder. Eli kicked the rug back over the trap door and walked out onto the porch just as the stranger reined in at the gate. The man had a narrow face and eyes like a polished flint. He tipped his hat, but his hand stayed near the heavy revolver on his hip. "Afternoon," the stranger said. His accent was thick, southern. "Afternoon," Eli replied, stepping down to the bottom stair. He didn't invite the man down. "Help you?" "Hope so. Looking for a woman. Goes by the name of Clara. Or maybe Marie. Or maybe nothing at all. Small things. Dark hair. Pretty. In a way that costs a man money." Eli took a slow drag from a rolled cigarette he had just lit. He looked the man over with bored disinterest. "Don't see many women out here. Just me and my hands." "Is that a fact?" The stranger leaned forward on his saddle horn. "Word in town is you took in a stray a few weeks back. A woman fitting the description." "I took in a cook," Eli lied, his voice steady as a rock. "Old woman, Mexican, deaf as a post. She died of the flux 3 days ago. Buried her on the ridge." The stranger stared at him. He was measuring Eli, weighing the scarred face and the soldier's stance against the effort of a fight. He looked past Eli at the house, then at the barn. "You wouldn't be lying to a deputized agent of the court, would you, friend?" "I ain't your friend," Eli said. "And I don't lie. Now, unless you want to dig up a dead Mexican grandmother to check her teeth. You're trespassing. The road to El Paso is that way." He pointed with the burning end of his cigarette. The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Right, the flux. Nasty way to go." He gathered his reins. "I'll be around. Mr. Thompson, just in case you remember anything else. Or in case that dead cook decides to walk again. He turned his horse and rode off slowly, looking back once. Eli waited until the rider was a mile out before he went back inside and pulled up the rug. When Clara climbed out, she was shaking so hard she couldn't stand. Eli caught her, holding her tight. "He's gone," he said. "But he'll be back. He didn't buy it." "That wasn't the bounty hunter," Clara whispered into his shirt. "That was one of his birds, a scout. He finds the prey, then the hunter comes to kill it." The attack came the following night. It was windless and dry, the kind of night where a spark could jump a mile. Eli woke to the smell of smoke before he heard the screams. "Fire!" The shout came from the bunkhouse. Eli was out of bed and into his boots in 10 seconds. He grabbed his rifle and ran out the door. The barn was ablaze. Flames licked up the side of the dry timber, reaching for the roof. The horses inside were screaming, a high, terrifying sound that tore through the night. "Get the buckets!" Eli roared. Sprinting toward the inferno, Clara ran out behind him, her hair flying, still in her nightdress. She grabbed a shovel and ran toward the water trough. The next hour was a blur of heat and smoke. The men formed a line, passing buckets, throwing dirt, shouting orders. They managed to kick open the stall doors and drive the terrified horses out into the corral. But the structure itself was doomed. The hay in the loft had caught, and the heat was intense enough to singe eyebrows at 20 paces. They fought until the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks that looked like hell's own fireworks. Then they stood back, heaving for breath, faces blackened with soot, watching the heart of the ranch burn to the ground. Eli stood leaning on his shovel, his chest heaving. He looked at the ruins. This wasn't an accident. A lantern didn't just fall in the loft in the middle of the night. "It was her!" The voice came from the darkness. It was Silas. He stepped into the flickering light of the dying fire, pointing a shaking finger at Clara. She stood near the water trough, drenched in sweat and soot, holding a bucket. "What are you saying, Silas?" Eli warned, his voice dangerous. "I saw her," Silas shouted, playing to the crowd of exhausted, angry men. "I saw her sneaking around the back of the barn an hour ago. She's a witch. She brings the law to our door, and now she burns us out." "That is a lie," Clara cried, stepping forward. "I was in the cabin. I was asleep." "Liar," Red shouted, caught up in the hysteria. "We should have run you off the day you walked in." The men surged forward. It was a mob mentality, fueled by fear and the destruction of their livelihood. They were looking for a scapegoat, and Clara was the perfect vessel for their rage. Eli stepped between the mob and Clara. He didn't raise his voice. He simply jacked around into the chamber of his Winchester. The metallic clack-clack was louder than the crackling fire. "The next man who takes a step toward her dies," Eli said. He didn't shout. He said it with the flat, factual tone of a man discussing the weather. He swept the barrel of the rifle across the line of men. They stopped. Even Silas, for all his bluster, knew that Eli Thompson didn't make idle threats. "This fire was set," Eli said, his eyes boring into Silas. "But not by her. Someone wanted to flush us out, or maybe someone wanted to create a diversion." "You're blinding yourself, boss," Silas yelled, though he backed up a step. "She's the death of this place. Go to the bunkhouse," Eli ordered. "All of you, now!" Slowly, muttering curses, the men dispersed. The anger hadn't dissipated. It had just gone underground, where it would fester. Eli turned to Clara. She was trembling, her face streaked with ash and tears. "Get your things," he said. "You aren't staying in the lean-to tonight. It isn't safe." "Eli, I didn't—" "I know you didn't, but they won't believe it. Get your things. You're moving into the cabin." Clara hesitated. She looked at the main house, then at him. "If I move in there, if I truly move in, there is no going back. They will say I am your whore. They will say I corrupted you." "Let them say it," Eli said roughly. "I'd rather be corrupted and alive than righteous and dead. Move!" The main cabin was warm, the fire in the hearth casting a low, orange glow. Eli locked the heavy oak door and dropped the crossbar. He checked the shutters on the windows. Clara stood in the center of the room, clutching her small carpet bag. She looked small and fragile in the large room that smelled so strongly of him. "You can take the bed," Eli said, pointing to the mattress in the corner. "I'll take the floor by the door." "No," Clara said. Eli turned. "No. I can't let you sleep on the floor in your own house, not after you saved me. Again." She dropped the bag. She walked over to him, her hands shaking. She began to undo the buttons of his ruined, soot-stained shirt. "Clara," he warned, catching her wrists. "You don't have to pay me for protection." "This isn't payment," she whispered, looking up at him. Her eyes were fierce. "This is needed. I need to feel something other than fear. I need to know that I am not just a ghost haunting your land." She pulled her hands free and touched his chest, running her palms over the scars, the old bullet wounds, the map of his pain. "But you have to know," she said, her voice breaking. "You have to know what you are letting into your bed. If I stay here, if I sleep here, no more lies." Eli stood still. "Tell me." Clara took a deep breath, a shudder running through her. "My husband, he wasn't just a gambler. He owned me. He owned other women. He ran a house in New Orleans." "A bad house." Eli went rigid, but he didn't pull away. "He forced me to work the tables," she continued, the words spilling out like bile. "He forced me to cheat men, to lure them in so he could rob them. And when the debts got too high, when he lost too much money, he tried to sell me. To a man from Chicago. For one night, or maybe for a week. I don't know." She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I refused. He hit me. He had hit me before, many times, but this time, I was pregnant." The room went silent. The only sound was the popping of the fire. "I was 4 months along," Clara whispered. "He beat me until I couldn't stand, and then he played cards with a man named Bonnet, and he put the baby on the table, not me, the baby, the unborn child." Eli felt a surge of nausea. "He bet the child?" "He lost," Clara sobbed, the tears finally spilling over. He told me when the baby was born, Bonnet would come for it, to raise it, to sell it? I don't know. That night, I waited until he was drunk, and I took his gun." She looked up at him then, her face ravaged by grief. "I didn't shoot him then. I ran until I lost the baby in a hotel room in Texas. But he found me. He always found me. And he told me the baby hadn't died. He told me he had taken it, that the midwife had sold it to Bonnet's people while I was sick with fever." "Is it true?" Eli asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't know," she wailed, collapsing against him. "I don't know if my baby is alive or dead, or if he just said it to break me, but I can't stop looking. I can't stop running." Eli caught her as she fell. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her smoky hair. The fury that rose in him was unlike anything he had felt in the war. It was a cold, focused desire to kill a man who was already dead. "He's gone," Eli whispered fiercely against her ear. "He can't hurt you. He can't touch you." "But the dirt," she wept. "I am dirty, Eli." "I am stained with it." "No," he said. He lifted her up, carrying her to the bed. He laid her down, not with the hesitant tenderness of before, but with a fierce possession. "You are not dirty. You survived." He stripped the soot-stained clothes from her body and his own. When he kissed her, it tasted of assault and ash. He kissed the scars on her mind as much as the skin on her body. Their lovemaking was a purging. It was desperate and raw, a collision of grief and rage. Clara clawed at his back, anchoring herself to the only solid thing in her universe. Eli took her with an intensity that bordered on violence, trying to drive the ghosts out of the room with the sheer force of his existence. There was no gentleness this time. There was only the frantic, overwhelming need to prove that they were alive, that they were here, and that the fire outside could not burn what was between them. When it was over, Clara lay sprawled across his chest, her breathing ragged. Eli held her, his arm like an iron band across her back. He stared into the darkness of the cabin, his eyes wide open. He knew then that he would burn the whole world down before he let anyone take her. The week that followed the fire was a strange, suspended breath in the life of the Thompson Ranch. The charred skeleton of the barn stood as a black monument against the blue sky, the smell of wet ash still clinging to the morning air. But within the main cabin, a fragile ecosystem of peace had begun to take root. It was a quiet, desperate kind of domesticity. Clara did not hide in the shadows anymore. She moved through the main house with a purpose that was half defiance and half gratitude. She scrubbed the soot from the floorboards until her knees were raw. She took over the small patch of garden behind the kitchen, fighting the encroaching desert with buckets of gray water carried from the wash basin. She coaxed life out of the dust, rows of struggling beans and a few hardy squash vines that seemed to feed on her stubbornness as much as the soil. Eli watched her. He watched her the way a man watches a storm cloud that has unexpectedly passed him by, leaving him standing in a shaft of sunlight he doesn't quite trust. In the late afternoons, when the sun began to dip and the heat lost its anvil-heavy edge, he took her out to the dry creek bed a mile past the ridge. He brought the Colt Peacemaker, the heavy iron worn smooth by his grip. "It pulls to the left," Eli said, standing behind her, his chest pressing against her back. He adjusted her grip, his rough hands covering her smaller, paler ones. "You have to compensate. Aim for the right shoulder if you want the heart." Clara held the weapon. It was heavy, smelling of oil and violence. "I don't want to kill anyone. Eli." "Nobody wants to," Eli murmured, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "But wanting has nothing to do with it. It is about living. Squeeze, don't pull, like you're wringing out a wet cloth. Slow." She squeezed. The gun roared, kicking back into her palm with a bruising force. The tin can perched on the dead log 20 yards away jumped, spun, and fell. "Good," Eli said. He didn't step away. He stayed there, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. The gun lowered. The echo of the shot faded, swallowed by the immense silence of the plains. For a moment, they just stood there, two scared people holding a smoking gun in a dead riverbed. It was intimate in a way that terrified them both. It was an acknowledgement that violence was now a shared language between them, a necessity binding them as tightly as the sheets on Eli's bed. But the world outside their bubble was not idle. The ranch was festering. On a Wednesday morning, Red, the older hand who had been with Eli since the war, threw his saddlebags onto the ground in front of the porch. He was red-faced, his eyes avoiding Eli's gaze but fixed with venomous intent on the front door where Clara stood. "I'm done," Red spat, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the step. "I want my wages. Thompson?" Eli looked up from the fence rail he was mending. "You walking out in the middle of the season?" "Red." "I ain't working for a man who lets a whore run his house," Red declared, his voice loud enough to carry to the bunkhouse where the other men were watching. "It's bad luck. Fire was a warning. Next time it'll be bullets. I ain't dying for her sins." Clara gripped the door frame, her knuckles white. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, but she knew anything she said would only be fuel for their fire. Eli walked over to the porch, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out $30 in gold and silver coins, more than Red was owed. He held it out. "Take it," Eli said quietly, "and don't stop riding until you hit the Arizona line." Red snatched the money. He mounted his horse, looking down at Clara one last time. "He can't protect you forever, lady. The law has a long memory." He rode out, dust billowing in his wake. That night, the silence in the cabin was heavy. Eli was out checking the perimeter, a ritual he had started since the fire. Clara was alone. She decided to change the linens on the bed they now shared every night. Huddled together against the cold and the fear, she stripped the quilt, then the top sheet. She reached for the bottom sheet, lifting the heavy feather pillow to fluff it. She froze. Lying there, pressed flat against the ticking of the mattress, was a piece of paper. It was folded in quarters, the edges worn soft as if it had been handled 1,000 times. Clara knew what it was before she touched it. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. She reached out with a trembling hand and unfolded it. It was a wanted poster. The typeface was bold, black and damning. Wanted for murder, Clara Dubosc, a.k.a. Clara Vance. Reward, $500. Below the text was a sketch. It was rough, charcoal lines on cheap paper, but it was undeniably her. The artist had caught the arch of her brow, the shape of her chin. It listed her crimes: murder of Jeremiah Vance, murder of Sheriff Deputy Silas Thorne, flight to avoid prosecution. Clara stared at the paper. The room seemed to tilt. $500. It was a fortune. It was enough to rebuild the barn 10 times over. It was enough to buy a new herd. Eli had it under his pillow. He slept on it every night, while she whispered her fears to him, while she let him touch her, while she trusted him with her life. He had been sleeping on the price of her head. The door opened. Clara spun around, the poster clutched to her chest. Eli stepped in. Shaking the dust from his coat, he saw her face instantly. The pallor, the wide, wounded eyes. Then he saw the paper in her hand. He stopped. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't make an excuse. He just closed the door and dropped the latch. "Clara," he said. "You knew," she whispered. Her voice broke. "You knew the whole time." "Not the whole time," Eli said, taking a step toward her. "Since the day I went to town for the pump part. It was on the wall in the marshal's office." "And you kept it," she accused, backing away until her legs hit the edge of the bed. "Why? Waiting for the bounty hunter to come so you could haggle? Or were you going to turn me in yourself when the work was done?" "No," Eli said. The word was sharp, cutting through her panic. $500. Eli, that's what I'm worth. That buys a lot of cattle." She threw the poster at him. It fluttered to the floor between them. Face up. "I trusted you. I gave you everything." She grabbed her carpet bag from the corner and began shoving clothes into it blindly. A shirt, a comb. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely grip the fabric. "I'm leaving," she sobbed. "I won't stay here and wait for you to sell me." She rushed toward the door. Eli moved faster than a man of his size should be able to. He caught her by the shoulders before she reached the latch. "Let me go!" she screamed. Fighting him, she struck his chest with her fists. Wild, frantic blows that had no power behind them. "Let me go! You liar! Let me go!" "Stop it!" Eli roared. He didn't shake her, but he held her firm, pinning her arms to her sides until the fight drained out of her, replaced by racking sobs. "I didn't keep it to sell you," Eli said, his voice dropping to a fierce, urgent whisper. "I ripped it off the wall in the marshal's office so no one else would see it. I put it under my pillow so I would know the face of the enemy, so I would know exactly what they were saying you did." Clara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "They say I killed 2 men. "Did you?" Eli asked. He looked deep into her eyes, searching for the soul he had come to know. "I need the truth, Clara, all of it, not the half-truths you gave me before. If I am going to stand between you and the rope, I need to know why." Clara slumped against him, her resistance breaking. She slid down to the floor, and Eli went with her, kneeling on the rough planks. "I didn't kill the deputy," she whispered. "I swear it. That was a frame-up. But Jeremiah, my husband..." She took a shuddering breath. "I killed him." Eli waited. He stroked her hair, his touch steadying her. "It wasn't about money," Clara said, her voice hollow. "And it wasn't. It wasn't my baby. I told you I lost mine. That was true. The fever took it in the womb after he beat me. But there was another girl, Molly. She was 16. She worked the upstairs rooms at the saloon Jeremiah ran." Clara looked at the fire, seeing a memory that burned brighter than the flames. Molly had a baby, a little girl. Jeremiah. He hated the noise. He said a crying brat was bad for business. One night, the baby wouldn't stop screaming. Molly was sick. She couldn't quiet it. Jeremiah went upstairs. He had a bucket of water. He said he was going to fix the leak. Eli's grip on her tightened. I followed him, Clara said. I saw him hold that baby over the bucket. Molly was screaming, trying to crawl off the bed, but she was too weak. He was laughing. Eli, he was laughing. She looked at her hands. I didn't think so. I just took the pistol from the drawer in the hallway. I walked in, and I shot him. I shot him in the chest. He dropped the baby on the bed. He looked at me, surprised, like he didn't think I had it in me. And the deputy? Eli asked. He was Jeremiah's partner, she said bitterly. He came in right after. He saw Jeremiah dead. He saw me holding the gun. He didn't arrest me. He tried to take what he wanted right there, over the body. I hit him with the lamp. The oil caught fire. The room went up. I ran. I grabbed Molly and the baby and I got them out the back, but the fire spread. They say the deputy died in it. They blamed me for the fire and the bullet. She looked at Eli, bracing herself for the rejection. For the disgust, I'm a killer. Eli, I shot a man, and I would do it again. Eli looked at her. He didn't see a murderer. He saw a woman who had walked through hell and come out with her soul charred but intact. He saw the same ferocious protective instinct that had made her save the foal in his barn on her first night. You're not a killer, Eli said. You're a soldier. He reached out and cupped her face. His thumbs wiped away the tears. You did what the law wouldn't. You protected the innocent. The law wants me dead, she whispered. Then the law will have to come through me, Eli said. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. It was a benediction. Then he kissed her eyelids, tasting the salt. Then his mouth found hers. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no awkwardness. The truth lay between them, naked and terrifying. And it only pulled them closer. Clara clung to him, her fingers tangling in his hair. Eli lifted her, carrying her back to the bed, not as a refuge from the cold, but as an altar. They made love with the desperate, frantic intensity of two people who hear the clock ticking. Every touch was a memorization. Eli traced the line of her spine, the curve of her hip, the scar on her palm, trying to burn the feel of her into his hands. Clara arched into him, whispering his name, trying to anchor herself to the earth through the weight of his body. It felt like a goodbye, and that made it all the sweeter. It was a fire in a world of ash, burning bright enough to consume them both. The reckoning arrived 2 days later, riding a dust-colored mare and wearing a long duster coat that had seen better decades. The man was not the scout who had come before. This was the hunter. He rode up to the main gate just as the sun was hitting its zenith, bleaching the color out of the world. He was a massive man, broad-shouldered and heavy, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of old leather. A silver star was pinned to his vest, dull and tarnished. He didn't shout. He just sat on his horse, staring at the house with eyes that had seen everything and forgiven nothing. Eli was on the porch. He had been expecting this. He had his rifle leaning against the rail, close enough to grab but far enough to look casual. Clara was inside. Eli had told her to hide in the root cellar again, but she had refused. She stood just behind the front door, a loaded shotgun in her hands, listening. Thompson, the man said. His voice was deep, a rumble of thunder in a canyon. That's my name, Eli said. He was whittling again, the knife shaving thin curls of cedar onto the porch floor. Name's Thorne. Caleb Thorne. U.S. Marshal's Service. Long way from the jurisdiction. Marshal, murder crosses state lines. Mr. Thompson. So do I. Thorne shifted in his saddle. I'm looking for a woman. Clara Dubosc, also known as Clara Vance. Had a man here a week ago asking the same thing, Eli said, not looking up from his wood. Told him the same thing I'll tell you. Don't know her. Thorne smiled. It was a chilling expression. Yeah, I spoke to my scout. He said you told him about a dead Mexican cook. I checked the ridge. Thompson. There's a grave there. Sure enough. But the earth is old. Hasn't been turned in 5 years. You lied to a federal agent. Eli stopped whittling. He looked up, his eyes meeting Thorne's. "I didn't lie. I just remembered wrong." Time blends together out here. Thorne dismounted. He hit the ground with a heavy thud. He tied his horse to the rail and walked up the steps. Stopping one down from the top, he towered over Eli. "Let's cut the manure," Thorne said. "I know she's here. I tracked her from New Orleans to Texas, and from Texas to this God-forsaken patch of dirt. She fits the description of the woman your neighbors say you've been keeping. A woman who knows how to lie, knows how to shoot, and knows how to disappear." "She's gone," Eli said. "Gone where?" "South," Eli lied, looking him dead in the eye. "She was here. I worked for a few weeks. Stole a horse, a bay gelding, and $200 from my safe 3 nights ago. Rode for the border. If you ride hard, you might catch her before she crosses the Rio Grande." Thorne studied him. He looked at the scar on Eli's face. He looked at the calluses on his hands. He was reading him, looking for the twitch, the blink, the hesitation. Eli gave him nothing. He was a stone. "You're a veteran," Thorne said. "Union?" "Confederate," Eli corrected. "Cavalry. Then you know about duty. You know about justice." "I know about war," Eli said. "And I know that justice is usually just revenge with a fancy name." Thorne stared at him for a long 10 seconds. Then he sniffed the air. "Smells like fresh bread baking." "I bake," Eli said. Thorne laughed, a dry, humorless bark. "I bet you do." He stepped back down to the dirt. "I'll check the border, but if I don't find her— Thompson, if I find out you sent me on a wild goose chase while she slipped out the back door, I will come back. And I will burn this place down around your ears legally, instead of just letting your barn catch fire." He mounted his horse. "You tell her. If you see her, tell her Caleb Thorne never stops. Not ever." He turned the horse and rode south, toward the river. Eli watched him go until the dust settled. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. When he finally turned and opened the door, Clara was standing there, the shotgun lowered, her face pale as milk. "He knows," she whispered. "He suspects," Eli said, taking the gun from her hands and setting it aside. "There's a difference, but he'll figure it out. He's smart. He'll check the crossings. When he doesn't find a trail, he'll circle back." "We have to leave," Clara said. "No," Eli said. "If we run, we look guilty, and he'll run us down in open country. Here, we have walls, we have water, we have a chance." But the ranch was fracturing. That evening, the bunkhouse was a hive of murmurs. Silas, the foreman, had watched the confrontation from the corral. He hadn't heard the words, but he had seen the badge. He had seen the fear in the way Eli stood. "He's harboring a fugitive," Silas told the men as they ate their beans. "That was a U.S. Marshal. You don't bring a marshal out here for a petty thief. She's a killer, and Thompson is protecting her." "So what?" Skeeter asked, looking nervous. "The boss pays our wages." "For how long?" Silas slammed his spoon on the table. "If the law comes down on this place, they seize everything, the land, the cattle, the money. We'll be left with nothing but the dust in our pockets. We could be arrested as accomplices." The men looked at each other. Fear was contagious. "I say we take matters into our own hands," Silas hissed, leaning in. "We hand her over. We collect the reward. I bet there is one, and we save our own skins." "The boss will kill you," one of the older hands said. "Not if we're smart," Silas said, his eyes gleaming with a rat-like cunning. "Not if we wait for the right moment. The marshal will be back, and when he comes, we make sure the gate is open." Up in the main house, Eli and Clara sat in the dark, watching the lights of the bunkhouse flicker. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The peace was over. The war had come to the Thompson Ranch, and this time there would be no surrender. The morning sun did not rise with hope. It rose with the revelation of treachery. The first sign was the silence. Usually, the windmill near the north pasture creaked with a rhythmic, metallic groan that served as the heartbeat of the ranch. But when Eli stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand. The air was dead still. The blades were spinning wildly, disconnected from the shaft, screeching like a banshee in the wind. Eli walked out to the trough. It was bone dry. The mud at the bottom was cracking, the water that should have been reserved for the herd having been drained into the thirsty sand during the night. He looked toward the fencing that lined the canyon ridge. Even from this distance, he could see the gaps. The wire had not snapped. It had been cut. "Sabotage," Eli said, his voice low. Clara stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She saw the look on his face, the cold, predatory focus that overtook him when the war came back to his mind. "Who did this?" "Silas," Eli said. "He and the others. They didn't just quit. They are trying to bleed us out before the wolves come." The cattle were already restless, lowing in the distance, smelling the lack of water. In this country, thirst kills faster than bullets. If they didn't fix the pipe and the pump rod immediately, the herd would be dead in 2 days, and if the herd died, the ranch died. "Get your boots," Eli told her. "We have to ride out. I can't fix the line alone, and I'm not leaving you here unguarded." They rode out an hour later, the sun already hammering down on their shoulders. The ranch felt abandoned. Skeeter and Cookie were the only ones left, holed up in the bunkhouse with shotguns, guarding the main gate. The rest of the men had vanished into the scrub, likely watching, waiting for the ranch to crumble. The ride to the windmill was tense. Eli kept his Winchester across his saddle, his eyes scanning every ridge and arroyo. Clara rode beside him, her face set in a grim line. She wore her riding skirt and the oversized shirt of Eli's she had claimed. A wide-brimmed hat pulled low over her eyes. The damage was deliberate and vicious. The iron rod connecting the windmill to the pump had been sawed halfway through and then snapped. The water tank had been punctured with a pickaxe. They worked in silence. It was brutal, heavy labor. Clara held the heavy iron casing while Eli hammered the replacement bolts. Her arms shook with the effort, sweat stinging her eyes, but she did not complain. They patched the tank with tar and canvas, their hands black and sticky, their breath rasping in the dry heat. By late afternoon, the pump coughed, wheezed, and finally spat a stream of clear water into the trough. Exhausted, they retreated to the shade of a limestone overhang to wait out the heat of the day before riding back. They sat on the ground, passing a warm canteen between them. Eli watched Clara wipe the grease from her cheek. She looked wild, elemental, a creature made of the same dust and iron as the land itself. "You are good at fixing broken things," Eli said. Clara looked at her hands. "I have had a lot of practice. My life has been a series of breaking and mending." "We are all broken." "Clara." "Not like me," she said bitterly. "You are a hero. Eli, you fought for a cause? You have scars." "Yes, but they are honorable. My scars are from sin." Eli laughed, a dry, humorless sound that startled a lizard on a nearby rock. "Honorable? Is that what they call it?" He took a swig from the canteen and looked out at the shimmering horizon. "It was 64, Tennessee. I was a sergeant under Major Sterling. We were sweeping a valley, looking for rebel supplies. We found a farmhouse, no soldiers, just an old man, 2 women, and 3 children." Clara watched him. His face had gone slack, his eyes staring at something 1,000 miles and 15 years away. "The major said they were harboring spies," Eli continued. His voice flat. "He ordered us to board up the doors and burn it, with them inside." Clara gasped softly. "I told him no. He put his pistol to my head. He said it was a direct order in a time of war. He said I was a traitor if I refused." Eli turned to look at her. "So I shot him." The silence of the desert seemed to deepen. "I put a bullet right between his eyes." Eli said, "The other men, they were drafted boys, scared, sick of the killing. They didn't say a word. We buried the major in a ditch and told the commander a sniper got him. We left the family alive and rode on." He reached out and took Clara's hand. His grip was hard, calloused. "I killed my own commanding officer. I murdered a man I was sworn to follow. And I have never lost a minute of sleep over it, because sometimes, Clara, the law is wrong. Sometimes Doing what is right means damning yourself to hell. Clara stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. For weeks, she had carried the weight of her husband's death, believing it made her a monster, believing that Eli, the righteous soldier, would despise her if he knew the full depth of her violence. You saved them, she whispered. I stopped a monster. Eli said, just like you did. We are the same. You and I, we both got blood on our hands to keep the innocent clean. The confession broke the last dam between them. The shared guilt was not a burden. It was a tether. It bound them together in a way that innocence never could. Eli pulled her to him. There was no hesitation, no coyness. They came together on the hard earth, under the shadow of the limestone, with the desperation of two people who knew the clock was running out. It was not gentle. It was a collision. Eli kissed her as if he could breathe his own life into her lungs. Clara clawed at his back, pulling him closer, needing the weight of him to anchor her to the world. They made love with the fierce, silent intensity of survival, their bodies slick with sweat and dust, asserting their existence against the vast indifference of the desert. When they lay apart, breathing heavy in the cooling air, Eli looked up at the first stars appearing in the violet sky. We go back, he said, and we fight. We fight, Clara agreed. They rode back under the cover of twilight, but trouble was waiting for them. As the ranch house came into view, Eli pulled whiskey up short. A campfire was burning near the main gate. Silhouettes moved against the light. They're here, Eli said. It wasn't just the saboteurs. 2 horses were tethered to the hitching rail, big, grain-fed animals that belonged to the government. Eli and Clara rode in slowly, their hands near their weapons. Standing by the fire was Caleb Thorne, the marshal. Beside him was a man Eli did not know, but his type was unmistakable. He wore a long duster, a low-slung gun belt, and a hat with a rattlesnake band. He had the dead eyes of a man who killed for money. This was the bounty hunter. Cookie and Skeeter were on the porch of the bunkhouse, shotguns leveled, but they were outgunned. Silas and 3 other traitorous hands stood near the marshal, looking smug. Evening, Thompson, Thorne called out. He sounded tired. I told you I'd be back if I found a reason. You found a reason? Eli asked, dismounting. He helped Clara down, keeping his body between her and the stranger. Found a witness, Thorne said, nodding toward Silas. Seems your foreman here has a lot to say about the lady's past. Says she confessed to killing a man in New Orleans. He's lying for the reward money, Eli said. The stranger stepped forward. He had a toothpick in his mouth, which he shifted from one side to the other. My name is Braxton. I represent the estate of Jeremiah Vance. I have a warrant for the arrest of Clara Vance, dead or alive, preferably alive. But I don't get paid by the hour, so I ain't picky. Braxton's hand hovered over his Colt. He looked at Clara with a leering appreciation. You caused a lot of trouble, darling. $500 worth. She isn't going with you, Eli said. It's over, Eli, Thorne said, his voice hardening. I have a sworn affidavit. I have a federal warrant. You turn her over by sunrise, or we come in and take her. And if we have to come in, you go to prison for harboring a fugitive, or you go to the graveyard. Sunrise, Braxton added with a grin. That gives you a few hours to say your goodbyes. Don't try to run. My boys are watching the pass. He gestured to the ridge, where the glint of a rifle barrel caught the moonlight. Eli looked at Thorne. You're letting a hired killer dictate the law. Marshal? I'm enforcing the writ, Thorne said, though he looked distastefully at Braxton. Sunrise, Thompson, don't make me kill a veteran. They pulled back to their camp by the gate. Eli and Clara walked into the main house. Cookie and Skeeter followed, locking the door behind them. The mood inside was funereal. Cookie began pulling heavy oak shutters over the windows, securing them with iron bars. Skeeter, pale and shaking, sat at the table loading shotgun shells with trembling hands. Eli took Clara into the bedroom. He pulled a saddlebag from under the bed. It was already packed with dried meat, ammunition, and water. There's a drainage gully behind the root cellar, Eli said, his voice urgent. It leads to the river. If you crawl, they won't see you. Take the roan mare. She's tethered in the scrub. I put her there 2 nights ago. Ride for Mexico." Clara looked at the bag, then at him. "And you?" "I'll hold them off." "I'll give you an hour." "You'll die," she said. "I'm a dead man anyway if I let them take you." Eli said, "Go, please. Clara, go live." Clara took the bag. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned it over and dumped the contents onto the bed. "No," she said. "Clara, no!" She turned to him, her eyes blazing. "I ran from New Orleans. I ran from Texas. I've been running my whole life. I am done. This is my home. You are my home. If I leave you to die for me, I am not surviving. I am just a ghost again." She walked over to the gun rack and took down the Winchester he had taught her to use. She checked the action. The metallic clicked loud in the quiet room. "We fight," she said. "Together." Eli looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine, the same steel he had seen the night she saved the foal, the night she faced the fire. He nodded once. Together. They spent the night preparing. They overturned the heavy oak table to create a barricade near the front door. They positioned ammunition at every window. Cookie took the back door. Skeeter took the loft. Eli and Clara took the front. Outside, the enemy waited. They could hear Silas laughing by the fire. The darkness stretched out, agonizing and slow. Eli sat on the floor, his back against the wall, Clara beside him. He held her hand. "If they breach the door," Eli said quietly, "aim for the knees. It slows them down." "I know," Clara whispered. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Eli? Yeah, I love you." It was the first time she had said it. The words hung in the air, fragile and absolute. Eli squeezed her hand. "I know. I love you too." The sky began to gray in the east. The birds started to sing, indifferent to the coming slaughter. "Time's up!" Braxton's voice boomed from the yard. "Send her out, Thompson, or we burn you out." Eli stood up. He walked to the window and cracked the shutter. "Come and get her," he shouted. The answer was a volley of gunfire. Bullets slammed into the wood of the cabin, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. The noise was deafening. Eli fired back, the Winchester kicking against his shoulder. He saw a man go down near the trough, one of Silas's traitors. "Back door!" Cookie screamed. Wood shattered as the heavy timber of the rear entrance splintered under the impact of a battering ram. Skeeter fired from the loft, his shotgun roaring, but the attackers were relentless. "They're inside!" Clara yelled. She leveled her rifle in the hallway. Silas burst through the kitchen door, followed by another hand named Dutch. They had flanked the house while Braxton kept the front busy. Silas saw Clara. He raised his pistol, a vicious grin on his face. "Gotcha, you witch!" Clara didn't hesitate. She fired. The bullet took Silas in the shoulder, spinning him around, but he didn't fall. He fired back wildly. The bullet smashed a vase on the mantel, showering Clara with glass. Eli turned from the window. Abandoning the front, he saw Dutch raising a shotgun toward Clara. Eli fired from the hip. The slug caught Dutch in the chest, throwing him back into the kitchen. But Silas was still up. He lunged over the overturned table, his knife drawn, eyes crazy with bloodlust. He wasn't trying to capture her anymore. He wanted to kill the thing that had ruined his easy life. Cookie came charging out of the kitchen, wielding a cast-iron skillet like a club. He slammed it into the back of Silas's head with a sickening crunch. Silas dropped like a stone. "Watch out!" Skeeter screamed from the loft. The front door exploded inward. Braxton stood there, framed by the rising sun, a pistol in each hand. He stepped over the debris, his eyes locking on Clara. "End of the line, sweetheart!" Braxton sneered. He raised the right pistol, aiming directly at her chest. There was no time to think, no time to aim. Eli threw himself across the space between them. The gun went off. The impact sounded like a heavy fist hitting a side of beef. Eli jerked violently in midair, his body acting as a shield. Absorbing the lead meant for Clara's heart. He crashed into her, knocking her to the floor. "Eli!" Clara screamed. a sound that tore her throat. Eli was heavy on top of her. Blood was already soaking through his shirt, hot and sticky. But he wasn't dead. His teeth were gritted in agony, his eyes wide with shock and adrenaline. Braxton laughed. 2 for 1. He walked forward to finish it, cocking the hammer of his left pistol. Eli groaned, his hand fumbling at his belt. He wasn't reaching for his rifle. It was gone. He was reaching for the Colt Navy on his hip, the gun he had used to kill a major in Tennessee. Braxton took aim at Eli's head. Clara tried to shield Eli with her own body, but Eli shoved her aside with his last ounce of strength. He rolled onto his back, lifting the Colt. Braxton fired. The bullet tore into the floorboards inches from Eli's ear. Eli fired. The shot hit Braxton in the stomach. The bounty hunter doubled over, gasping. Eli fired again. The second shot hit him in the chest. Braxton fell backward, crashing through the remnants of the front door and landing in the dust of the porch. He twitched once and was still. Silence fell over the room. It was absolute, ringing in their ears. "Eli!" Clara scrambled over to him, pressing her hands against the wound in his chest. It was high, near the shoulder, but the blood was coming fast. "Oh, God! Eli, look at me! Stay with me! I'm here!" Eli rasped. His face was gray. Did I get him?" "You got him! You got him!" She was weeping now, her tears mixing with the blood on his shirt. Boots crunched on the broken glass. A shadow fell over them. Clara grabbed Eli's dropped Colt and spun around, leveling it at the intruder. It was Marshal Thorne. He stood in the doorway, his gun drawn but pointed at the floor. He looked at Braxton's dead body on the porch. He looked at Silas, unconscious and bleeding in the corner. He looked at the dead man in the kitchen. Then he looked at Clara. She was covered in blood, fierce as a lioness, shielding the fallen rancher with her own body. "Drop the gun." "Clara," Thorne said softly. "I won't let you take him," she hissed. "You'll have to kill me." Thorne looked at Eli. He saw the wound. He saw the way the man had thrown himself in front of the bullet. He saw the utter devotion in the woman's eyes. This wasn't the scene of a crime. It was a scene of war. Thorne slowly holstered his pistol. "Braxton was deputized," Thorne said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "But he acted outside his authority. He fired first, he endangered civilians, and from where I'm standing, it looks like he was shot in self-defense by a homeowner protecting his property." Clara's hands trembled. "What?" Thorne stepped over the debris. He knelt beside them. He didn't reach for handcuffs. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, pressing it against Eli's wound. "Hold this," Thorne ordered. "Tight." Clara obeyed, her hands shaking. "The man in New Orleans," Thorne said, looking Clara in the eye. "We found the witness letters yesterday. The saloon girl, Molly. She wrote to the judge, said you saved her baby, said Jeremiah Vance was going to kill it." Clara stopped breathing. "The paperwork is slow," Thorne said, "but the truth has a way of walking fast. I got a telegram in El Paso this morning before I rode out. I just wanted to verify it before I called Braxton off. But Braxton..." He was impatient. Thorne looked at the dead bounty hunter with disgust. He wanted the money more than the law. "Is she free?" Eli wheezed, grimacing as the pressure on his wound increased. Thorne looked at the destruction around them. He looked at the loyalty of the old cook and the young boy coming down from the loft. "She defended herself against an unlawful attack," Thorne said. He stood up. "Get him to the doctor in Massilia. If you ride fast, he won't bleed out." "And the warrant?" Clara asked, tears streaming down her face. Thorne tipped his hat. "What warrant? I came out here to serve a paper on a dead woman. Looks to me like Clara Vance died in that fire back in New Orleans. You're just Clara Thompson now, aren't you?" He turned and walked out, stepping over the body of the man who had tried to sell her life for $500. Clara collapsed over Eli, sobbing with relief. Eli reached up, his bloody hand stroking her hair. "Told you," he whispered, a ghost of a smile on his pale lips. "We fight together." The bullet had gone through the meat of the shoulder, missing the lung by less than an inch, but it had taken a piece of Eli Thompson's strength with it. for the first time since the war. The man of iron was confined to the sheets of his own bed, battling a fever that burned hotter than the New Mexico sun. The days bled into a haze of pain and shadows. Eli drifted in and out of consciousness, his dreams filled with the smoke of cannons and the smell of burning barns. But every time he woke, clawing his way back to the surface of the living, she was there. Clara did not hover like a nervous bird. She sat by the bedside with the stillness of a sentinel. She changed his bandages with hands that had learned steadiness holding a rifle. She forced willow bark tea and broth between his lips when he was too weak to swallow. She wiped the sweat from his forehead with a cloth dipped in cool water from the spring she had helped repair. "You are too stubborn to die, Eli Thompson," she would whisper in the deep hours of the night when his breathing turned ragged. "Do not let a cheap bounty hunter do what the Union Army could not." It took 3 weeks for the fever to break. It took another month before he could stand without the room spinning like a darker version of a carousel. When he finally walked out onto the porch, leaning heavily on a cane whittled from ash wood, he found a different world. The ranch was scarred. The black skeleton of the barn still loomed against the sky, a jagged reminder of the violence that had visited them. The bunkhouse was empty save for Cookie and Skeeter, the only two who had remained loyal when the bullets flew. The herd had scattered, thin and skittish, into the deep arroyos of the foothills. But amidst the ruin, there was green. Clara had not just nursed him. She had nursed the land. While he slept, she had hauled water. She had turned the earth in the garden patch, coaxing rows of hardy winter squash and beans from the dust. She had ridden the fence line with Skeeter, restitching the cut wire until her fingers were raw and wrapped in rags. Eli watched her from the porch. She was in the corral, working with a young colt, a leggy paint that had been wild as a hawk 2 weeks ago. She stood in the center of the ring, speaking in that low, thrumming voice that seemed to vibrate in the animal's bones. She held no rope. She simply extended a hand, and the colt walked to her, pressing its velvet nose against her palm. She looked up and saw him. A smile broke across her face, brilliant and relieved, transforming her from a weary survivor into something radiant. "You are standing," she called out. "I got tired of the view from the pillow," Eli rasped. His voice was weak, but the steel was coming back into it. Clara left the corral, latching the gate, and walked to him. She didn't offer to help him sit. She knew his pride too well. She simply stood beside him, looking out at the broken, beautiful land. "We lost 12 head of cattle," she said, reporting the news as if she were the foreman. "And the roof of the root cellar needs timber. But the water is flowing. And the men, the bad ones are gone. It is quiet now." "Quiet is good," Eli said. He reached out and covered her hand with his own. His grip was not yet strong, but it was sure. "You did all this." "I live here," Clara said simply. A home does not keep itself. The rebuilding was slow, brutal work. With no money to hire new hands, the labor fell to the 4 of them. Eli, frustrated by his weakness, took over the cooking and the leather work, sitting on the porch to mend harnesses while Clara and Skeeter rode out to gather the strays. It was a reversal of roles that would have shamed a lesser man. But Eli watched her ride out each morning, her spine straight, his hat pulled low over her eyes, his rifle in the scabbard, and felt only a fierce, terrifying pride. She was not just a woman he had saved. She was the blood in the veins of the ranch. 6 weeks after the shooting, a rider appeared on the south road. Eli reached for the rifle leaning against the railing, his instinct for danger still sharp. Clara, who was chopping wood by the side of the house, froze, her axe poised in midair. It was Marshal Thorne. He rode alone this time, without the ominous shadow of a bounty hunter beside him. He tied his horse to the hitching post and walked up the steps, dusting his hat against his leg. "Coffee's on," Eli said, leaving the rifle where it was. "I could use a cup," Thorne admitted. He looked at Eli's shoulder. "Healing up?" Slowly, Thorne nodded. He turned to Clara. She had not moved. She stood gripping the axe handle, her knuckles white, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The fear in her eyes was a living thing. Thorne reached into his duster pocket. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled a folded document, sealed with the heavy wax of the Louisiana courts. "It took some doing," Thorne said, his voice gruff, "and a lot of telegrams. But the circuit judge in New Orleans finally got off his backside." He walked down the steps and held the paper out to Clara. The testimony of Molly O'Shea was corroborated by 2 other women from the establishment, Thorne said. They testified that Jeremiah Vance was violent, unstable, and that on the night of his death, he had threatened the life of an infant. They also testified that Deputy Thorne, no relation, thank the Lord, was involved in the arson to cover up his own theft of the saloon safe. Clara stared at the paper. She didn't take it. "What does that mean?" "It means," Thorne said, shoving the paper into her hand, "that the shooting of Jeremiah Vance has been ruled justifiable homicide in defense of a third party, and the arson charges have been pinned on the dead deputy. You're clear, Mrs. Thompson. The warrant is quashed. You are a free woman." Clara dropped the axe. It thudded into the dirt, narrowly missing her boot. She looked at the paper, the black ink swimming before her eyes. Dismissed, exonerated, free. The legs that had carried her across 3 states, that had outrun horses and men and death itself, suddenly gave way. She crumbled toward the earth. Eli was there. He moved faster than his injury should have allowed, catching her before she hit the ground. He pulled her against his good side, holding her up as she shook apart. "It's over," Eli whispered into her hair. "Clara, it's over. You aren't running anymore." She wept then. She wept with the force of a dam breaking, a torrent of grief and relief that shook her entire body. She cried for the years of fear, for the baby she had lost, for the husband she had killed, and for the peace she had never believed she would taste. Thorne watched them for a moment, then tipped his hat to no one in particular. He remounted his horse and rode away without a goodbye, leaving them to the sanctity of their tears. That night, the silence in the cabin was different. It was not the tense, waiting silence of the siege. It was a deep, hollow silence, like the air after a thunderstorm. Clara lay in Eli's arms, her head on his chest. The fire had burned down to embers. "I have to go," she said into the dark. Eli stiffened. "Go? Clara, the marshal said—" "Not because of the law," she interrupted, lifting her head to look at him. In the dim light, her face was determined, etched with a new kind of pain. "Because of the child." Eli said nothing. He waited. "Molly's baby?" she whispered. "The one I saved. I left him in a church orphanage in East Texas. I was sick. I was running. I had no money. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought they would find him a home." She traced the line of the scar on Eli's jaw. "But I dream of him. Eli, I dream of his crying. I saved his life, but I abandoned him. Just like I was abandoned. I cannot build a life here, a happy life, knowing that somewhere out there, a child I swore to protect is alone." "I'll saddle the horses," Eli said immediately. "We leave at first light." "No." Clara sat up, pulling the quilt around her. "No, Eli, you cannot go. Look at you. You can barely ride to the fence line without bleeding. And the ranch. If you leave now, after everything, the scavengers will come back. Silas's friends. The land grabbers. There will be nothing left when we return. I don't care about the ranch." Eli lied. "I care about you." "I know," she said softly. "But this land is part of you. It is your blood. If we lose it, I lose a part of you. I have to do this alone. I have to retrace my steps. I have to go back into the dark so I can walk fully into the light." Eli looked at her. He wanted to forbid it. He wanted to lock the door and keep her safe. But he knew that you could not keep a hawk in a jar. She had earned her freedom, and now she had to use it to heal the last wound in her soul. "How long?" Eli asked, his voice tight. "As long as it takes to find him, or to find out he is gone." "You come back," Eli said. It was an order, a plea, and a prayer all in one. "Promise me, you come back to me." Clara leaned down and kissed him. It was a kiss of absolute certainty. "I promise. This is my home. You are my home." She left 2 days later. She took the roan mare, a bag of gold coins Eli forced upon her, and the Winchester rifle. Eli stood at the gate and watched her ride south until the dust swallowed her whole. He did not turn away until the sun went down. The months that followed were the longest of Eli Thompson's life. Winter descended on the high desert, harsh and biting. The wind howled through the canyons, stripping the leaves from the cottonwoods and covering the world in a frost that looked like crushed diamonds. Eli worked. He worked with a manic intensity, pushing his healing body to its limits. He and Skeeter rebuilt the barn, beam by heavy beam. They rounded up the herd, branding calves in the freezing mud. They drove off coyotes and repaired the roof of the main house. Every nail he drove was an act of faith. Every fence post he dug was a preparation. He was building a kingdom for a queen who might never return. Doubt was a constant companion. At night, when the wind rattled the shutters, he imagined her dead in a ditch. He imagined her captured. He imagined her realizing that a life of solitude with a scarred rancher was not enough. But he remembered her eyes. He remembered the promise. So he endured. Spring arrived with a sudden explosion of wildflowers. The desert turned purple and yellow, the scent of sage and rain filling the air. It was late April when the dogs began to bark. Eli was in the tack room, oiling a saddle. He froze. The barking was not the aggressive snarling reserved for strangers. It was the high, excited yip of recognition. He dropped the rag. He walked out into the yard, his heart hammering a rhythm against his ribs that was painful in its intensity. A rider was coming up the road. The horse was thin, ribs showing through its winter coat. The rider was slumped, covered in a layer of gray dust that made them look like a statue carved from stone. But Eli knew the set of those shoulders. He ran. He didn't care about his limp. He didn't care about dignity. He ran to the gate and threw it open just as the roan mare stumbled to a halt. Clara slid from the saddle. She was gaunt, her face hollowed by exhaustion, her dress tattered and stained with the road. But her eyes were bright, burning with a fierce triumph. And she was not alone. Clutched against her chest, wrapped in a faded woolen blanket, was a child. Eli stopped 3 feet from her. He couldn't speak. Clara looked at him, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "I found him," she whispered. Her voice was cracked, dry as parchment. She peeled back the blanket. The boy was small, perhaps 4 years old. He was terrifyingly thin, his collarbones pressing against pale skin like fragile wings. He had a mop of dark hair and eyes the color of water in a tin bucket. Pale, watchful, and old beyond their years. "He wasn't in the orphanage anymore," Clara said, her voice shaking. They had sold him out for labor to a tannery in Galveston. He was sleeping in a shed. He didn't even know his name." The boy looked at Eli. He didn't cry. He didn't hide. He just watched, with the wary stillness of a creature that expects to be kicked. Eli looked at the boy. He saw the fear. He saw survival. He saw the same look he had seen in Clara's eyes that first night on the porch. Eli stepped forward. He didn't reach for Clara. He reached for the boy. "He's heavy," Eli said gently. "Let me take him." Clara hesitated, then nodded. She passed the child into Eli's arms. The boy stiffened, his small hands balling into fists. But Eli held him with the easy strength of a man who has carried calves and timber and wounded soldiers. "You're safe here, son," Eli said to the boy. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating against the child's chest. "Nobody hurts you here, not ever." The boy blinked. He looked at Clara, then back at Eli. Slowly, the tension went out of his small frame. He rested his head against Eli's shoulder. Clara let out a sob and collapsed against Eli's free side. He wrapped his arm around her, holding them both, the woman who had saved him, and the child they would save together. "Welcome home," Eli said. Summer came, baking the land hard and gold. The ranch was alive again. The herd had grown, the barn smelled of fresh hay, and the garden was bursting with tomatoes and squash. But the real life of the ranch was the boy. They called him Samuel. He was quiet at first, hoarding food in his pockets and flinching at sudden noises. But the desert had a way of healing things that were broken. It offered space to breathe. One evening, as the sun was setting in a blaze of violent orange, Eli stood by the fence rail with Samuel. The boy had filled out, his skin turning a healthy nut brown from the sun. Eli held his old .22 rifle. He crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "You respect the weapon, Sam," Eli said, his voice serious. "It isn't a toy. It takes life. We only use it to protect or to feed, never in anger." Samuel nodded, his pale eyes wide. "Yes, sir." "All right, tuck the stock against your shoulder. Tight. Like this." Eli guided the boy's small hands. He adjusted the stance. He pointed to a line of tin cans sitting on a log 30 yards away. "Take a breath," Eli murmured. "Let it out halfway. Squeeze." Crack. The dirt puffed up a foot to the left of the can. "You jerk the trigger," Eli said gently. "Smooth, like you're touching a butterfly's wing." Clara watched from the porch. She was shelling peas into a bowl, the metal ping providing a counterpoint to the lesson. She watched the man she loved teach the boy she had rescued how to survive. She saw the way Eli touched the boy's hair, a gesture of casual affection that would have been impossible for the man he was a year ago. She saw the way Samuel looked up at him, not with fear, but with hero worship. The second shot rang out. The tin can flew into the air, spinning silver in the sunset light. "I got it," Samuel shouted, a rare, pure sound of joy. "Eli, I got it." "Good shot, son," Eli said, a smile cracking his scarred face wide open. "Damn good shot." That night, the wind picked up, howling across the empty plains with the lonely, ancient sound of the American West. It rattled the windows and hissed through the floorboards, a reminder that the world outside was still wild, still dangerous. But inside the cabin, the air was still. Samuel was asleep in the loft, breathing the deep, dreamless sleep of the safe. Clara lay in the big feather bed, the quilts pulled up to her chin. Eli blew out the lantern, plunging the room into a soft, blue darkness. He climbed in beside her. The mattress groaned, a familiar, comforting sound. He pulled her to him, her back against his chest, his arm draping over her waist to hold her close. There was no need for words. There was no need for confessions or apologies. The past was a ghost that had finally been laid to rest in the desert sand. Clara curled her fingers into Eli's hand. She felt the calluses, the scars, the warmth of his blood. She felt the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against her back. "Are you cold?" Eli whispered, his lips brushing her ear. "No," Clara answered, closing her eyes. "I am not cold. I am not hiding. I am here." "I am here too," Eli said, outside. The wind screamed, searching for cracks, searching for weakness. But it found none. In the dark of the cabin, there were no more lies. Just breathe, just skin, just love. Finally, and completely unburdened. Thank you for riding along on this journey through the high desert with Clara and Eli. It has been a pleasure to dust off the old typewriter and bring the American West to life for you. I would love to know where you are listening from. Are you reading this under the city lights, or somewhere out where the stars can still be seen? Please leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and grit, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more tales of the frontier, and I'd be much obliged if you'd share your thoughts on the story in English. Did Eli and Clara find the peace they deserved? Until next time, keep your powder dry.